there is one thing scientists love, it's making new discoveries about their environment. As they research, they sometimes come across strange and surprising phenomena, one of which is happening in Australia at the moment. Scientists and geologists in Australia have done a lot of research about the country's history, much of which has yielded little result. However, that changed recently when a terrifying discovery was uncovered which raised many controversies. What did scientists discover? What effects would it have on those living in Australia? Join us as we explore scientists' new discovery in Australia that changes everything. UFO in a storm. In Broome, Australia, the police department there tends to post several pictures of confiscated alcohol and stolen property which needs to be claimed on their social media page. However, one particular picture went up on the page which caught the eyes of the entire Australian community and even media organisations outside Australia. The post featured a nighttime period in a storm, footage taken by one of the CCTVs in a parking lot. In the picture, you can observe a tree and a couple of lightning flashes in the sky. But there is also something else in the sky, one that stirred a lot of controversies. In the corner, a figure is seen floating in the skies, taking the shape of an alien ship or UFO. It had the shape of a glowing triangle inside a floating circle. The alien ship must have thought it was being watched or had been captured by the CCTV, as it was on the screen for a while before it flew into the side corner, out of the camera's sight. When the Broome police saw the footage, it felt like a joke to them. They updated their social media page with the picture, joking that we are getting visited by aliens who come to watch us as we sleep. But as we know, aliens and UFO enthusiasts wouldn't let it go, as they claim it was truly a UFO sighting and not an assumption. Scott Warren, a UFO enthusiast, had almost dismissed the idea of it being a UFO at first, even until he closely observed the triangle light up and changed his mind instantly. He isn't the only one who believes this unidentified flying object is a UFO, though other UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists are on the same page with him. However, not only the UFO enthusiast had something to say about the sighting. A film equipment expert by the name of J.J. Abrams noted to the public that this sighting in the picture is called a lens flare. He proved this by drawing our attention to a vehicle backing up in the screen's lower right-hand corner, and this vehicle's movement happened with the glowing apparition. These two reasons have left the Australian community and the world at a crossroads. Is it an actual UFO sighting, as Scott Warren and his colleagues claimed, or is it just a lens flare? I hope we'll find out soon. The world's oldest axe. As far back as the 1990s, some excavations were done in a cave at the Windjana Gorge National Park in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, when archaeologists came across an old piece of rock. It was kept until recently, when scientists decided to find out about the rock's compositions. That was when scientists discovered that this piece of rock is a fragment of the cutting edge of an axe that would have had a handle and was used between 46,000 to 49,000 years ago. As it was discovered in Australia, it strengthens the idea that Europe wasn't the birthplace of technology. It also showed that settlers in Australia started inventing tools to aid their daily activities not long after they moved into Australia, which estimates range between 50,000 and 55,000 years ago. The discovery of this axe also predates another axe found in Arnhem Land in Australia and dated 35,000 years ago. This axe fragment is also older than the axe found in Japan, dating 38,000 years back. Judging from the perspective that this discovery is just a fragment might not be correct, does not matter, as the fragment itself is pretty distinctive. The fragment exhibits polished surfaces coming together on the chip, and even if the axe is not available, there are good representations of what the contact edge looks like. Even though there is no handle, scientists who discovered the axe say it is not a simple hand axe. This is because it is a polished axe and was made of a heavy material which would not help much for a tool intended to be used by a hand. This is the earliest evidence of a shafted axe in the world. Nowhere else in the world do you get axes at this date, said Sue O'Connor from the Australian National University, who originally excavated the tool in the 1990s. Researchers propose that the axe was probably invented in Australia, since there is no proof of similar tools in Southeast Asia from where the migrants came. Peter Hiscock, the professor who made this recent discovery of the fragment being an axe, came up with some different theories regarding the axe's invention. He proposed that this axe showed humans colonized the world not because of a skill they had and could apply everywhere, but because of their creativity and sense of innovation. After analyzing the axe fragment, researchers believed it was probably made by people who moved to Australia from Southeast Asia, where much bamboo was likely used for tools. However, there was no bamboo to use in their new location, so they had to invent tools that would aid them in adapting to their new environment. Seeing this discovery showed that we ought to give ancient humans more respect than they deserve when it comes to ancient innovations, because these discoveries showed they were far more advanced than scientists and scholars previously thought. The discovery has also disproved the speculations of European scholars from the 19th century, which said all the innovations happened in Europe, and distant places like Australia were simple, had little innovations, and just went with the flow. It turns out there is a long history of ancient axes, with this fragment's discovery predating all other axe discoveries. The Narrabeen Man. In January 2005, a team of contractors were digging the ground in preparation for a gas pipeline on the northern beaches. They dug the hole to pass the pipeline under a bus shelter in Narrabeen near the corner of Octavia and Ocean Streets. At this stage, they noticed the legs of a human, which later turned out to be a 6-foot-tall human skeleton under the bus shelter. Out of fear, they thought they had discovered a recently murdered victim, so they called the police to come check it out. On the police's arrival, they called the coroner, and when the coroner got there, they called in the national parks. National Parks also informed some experts to visit the site to examine the situation, and that was how they discovered that the skeleton's owner was not murdered recently. The skeleton has been lying dead for the past 4,000 years. Upon discovery, the construction workers stopped their work immediately after they saw the bones, and no damage was dealt to the skeleton remains. This made it easy for the scientists to investigate the skeleton, although they had to gently remove a huge pile of sand before they could excavate the skeleton. The skeleton's bones were still properly set, with all its bones in their anatomical position. Among the bones, 17 stone artifacts were also found. When these scientists took out the body and analyzed the remains, they found out that the skeleton was not buried in the traditional burial posture, which is the hands by the side or across the chest. The skeleton was found in a weird position, as he was buried on his side with one arm across his head. Traces of spear hits and a terrifying slice through the top of the skeleton's skull were also found. With these signs, scientists concluded that he must have been attacked brutally, or it was some kind of ritual death. Further analysis was carried out on the Narrabeen man's skeleton in order to uncover more details. The scientists performed some radiocarbon dating and isotope chemistry analysis on the bones, revealing that they belonged to an uncommonly tall indigenous man, aged between 39 and 40 years old, who had survived on a diet of seaweed, fish, and shellfish. Scientists also noticed that the skeleton still had his front teeth, which speculated that he did not belong to the ancient Australian coastal community. This is because there was a ritualistic tooth avulsion practice in this region at the time of the Narrabeen man's death. The Narrabeen man's violently preserved death is the first archaeological evidence of death by spearing in Australia, and is just one of the many examples of the Eora Nation's culture and history. It also makes this discovery the third oldest skeleton in Australia after Mungo Man and the Mungo Lady. A 182-year-old burial vault beneath Central Station. Discovered in 2021, some construction workers were excavating the soil around Central Station in Australia in order to construct the new metro platforms. During this process, they encountered a terrifying surprise. In the mud around Platform 13, they discovered several strange blocks that turned out to be a 182-year-old family burial crypt after archaeologists observed it. It was examined further, and a total of 11 graves were found in the crypt, alongside 8 skeletons. The graves' nameplates were also still legible. These types of crypts are known to belong to exclusive families, with the discovered one belonging to the Perry and Ham families. Their burial site showed the lingering remains of the massive Devonshire cemetery site, which was closed in 1867. When Central Station was constructed in 1901, about 30,000 graves were relocated. However, not all the records were kept well, making many unrecorded graves forgotten and now being unearthed in the renovation works. Over 60 graves and 5 vaults were uncovered during the train station's redevelopment. This discovery also gave an insight into the life and burial practices of Australia's earliest colonial settlers, so it's more of an educational discovery for us. It also depicts that no matter how bored we may get in our daily public transport commutes, there could be a whole unexplored area underneath our feet, which holds many stories that we may never fathom. 20,000-year-old human footprints found in Australia. About 20,000 years ago, 5 human hunters sprinted across the soft clay on the edge of a wetland in what is now known as New South Wales, Australia. Other hunters also travelled across the muddy landscape. These people included a family of 5, a small child, and a one-legged man who hopped without a crutch. How are these details still visible even after 20,000 years long after death? Well, they left behind a beautiful gift which can be found in Mungo National Park, about 195 miles from Broken Hill. Embedded among the sand dunes of the now dry Willandra Lakes World Heritage Area are 700 fossil footprints discovered in Australia and the largest collection of such prints in the world. A Muddy tribal elder identified as Mary Pappen Sr. talked about the footprints, saying the footprints' age shows just how intelligent and adaptable the Aboriginal ancestors were. We did not die 60,000 years ago. We didn't dry up and died away 26,000 years ago when the lakes were last full, she said. The tracks show that the ancient tribe was very active in the area where the fossil footprints are located, and some of them were quite puzzling, such as one of the foot tracks, which experts say was from a one-legged person. Scientists were bewildered at this one-legged footprint, as each step left a very deep impression in the mud due to the pressure on the one leg. It is one of the most defined footprints on the entire foot track site, but there are no traces of the left foot at all. Scientists were still puzzled about the discovery until it was solved with the help of 5 trackers from the Pintupi people of Central Australia, who confirmed a one-legged man definitely made them. It also helped the Pintupi know more about their history, discovering that an active one-legged man once lived in their tribe. The Pintupi trackers believe the one-legged man was quite agile for him to throw his support stick aside and hop very fast on one foot, leaving deep and clear prints that lasted 20,000 years. The Pintupi trackers also gave scientists and researchers more insight, highlighting more details about the footprints that researchers didn't even notice. One such detail was a small set of round holes where a man stood with a spear. Another was an illegible scrawl in the mud, probably drawn by a child. Scientists conducted further research about these footprints, especially for the footprints left by a group tagged the 5 Hunters. The fossil footprint area seems blessed with history, as 17,000-year-old human remains were excavated near the fossil site. Scientists used the data obtained from these 17,000-year-old human remains and analyzed them with the fossil tracks such as stride length and foot size. Analysis of the excavated bones showed that the Aboriginal ancestors were tall, very athletic, and in optimal health. This became concrete proof when a researcher calculated one of the footprints from the 5 Hunters catalogue, and his outcome showed one hunter was running at 23 miles an hour, or as fast as a sprinter at the Olympics. Till today, the team of scientists has identified about 700 footprints. They also proposed that ground-penetrating radar could detect that 1,000 more footprints could lie below the ground in at least 8 layers of ancient mud stacked like trodden carpets. Presently, the excavated track sits under protective layers of cloth and dirt to save them from erosion likely to be caused by rain, wind, or sand. The footprint will remain there until scientists and Aboriginal community members devise a plan to protect the ancient footprints. There are also plans to erect community and educational centers near the site in order to make it a mini tourist attraction. The tribespeople also hopes to create a sacred shelter for the fossil prints to protect an integral part of their ancestral history. Karkakucha, the ancient murder victim. This murder mystery made headlines back in the year 2014 when William Bates found a skeleton by a river. Bates was an elder of the Barkanchi people of New South Wales, and from his years of wisdom, he was able to identify the skeleton as an Aboriginal male. Signs of violence were visible on the bones. Whenever dead remains are found, the first thing detectives and forensic specialists do is establish the time of death. Initially, it was assumed that this man had been killed during the bloodshed between the indigenous people and the British colonizers between the 18th and 19th centuries. But when Dr. Michael Westway, a paleoanthropologist from Griffith University, Queensland, examined the body, more information came to light. According to Westway, the remains were of a man that a lot of people cared for. He concluded this from the way the head was tenderly placed on a cushion of sand in the burial. The long wound on his skull seemed to be from a cutlass blade that was used by the British militia, but they were way off. After lab analysis, it was revealed that the Aboriginal man had been killed in the 13th century, hundreds of years before the British arrived in Australia and introduced metal objects. So if it wasn't a metallic weapon, then what killed this man, now famous as Karkucha, which means older brother? According to one theory, the fatal injury resulted from Lil, a sharpened club, but Westway has pointed towards an iconic Aboriginal symbol, the boomerang, a long sharp-edged weapon most probably wielded by Karkucha's enemy. The discovery supports the theory of intertribal conflict. Another proof is the series of rock paintings found where Karkucha's body was recovered. These depict two tribes in different colors wielding shields, boomerangs, and clubs. Scientists have now established that Karkucha died from a fatal blow to the head around 800 years ago. These bones provide shocking insight into life, death, and tribal turmoil in pre-colonial Australia. NASA's Skylab. In July 1979, the first and only US space station called Skylab began its journey back into the Earth's atmosphere. NASA was hoping for a safe landing and to reuse and refurbish the space station once it was back, but the Skylab missed its intended re-entry target. The debris of the space station was supposed to land 810 miles south-southeast of Cape Town, South Africa, but due to a 4% calculation error, it fell about 300 miles east of Perth in Western Australia. Most of the debris landed between the small coastal town called Esperance and the remote rail and mining outpost called Rawlina. The landing was quite an exciting event for the Esperance locals. The NASA officials arrived at the site and requested the locals to hand over any debris they found. The local Museum of Esperance also started building its collection, and today it contains all sorts of Skylab artifacts that fell to Earth. These include huge titanium nitrogen spheres, oxygen tanks, fragments of metal and insulation foam, ruined circuit boards, a portion of the space station's main hatch, and the storage freezer of Skylab. The museum has also displayed a model of Skylab on a pedestal outside. There's also a billboard close by that states, "In 1979, a spaceship crashed over Esperance. We fined them $400 for littering, paid in full." Surprisingly, this is a true story. The local government did actually send NASA a $400 littering fine after Skylab debris landed here. NASA, however, never paid the fine. Instead, on the 30th anniversary of Skylab's re-entry, a radio host for highway radio in the USA raised the funds to officially pay the fine. The huge paycheck now hangs in the museum too, just above the bits and pieces that remain of the old, unfortunate space station. Magnetic termite mounds. Endemic to the Northern Territory of Australia, Amitermes meridionalis, also called the compass termite, builds mounds that are tall, thin, and aligned like compass needles. So far, no one really knows why or how the termite builds these. Driving south from the city of Darwin, you will see unusual structures within the trees around the road. These resemble massive grey planks of dirt standing on edge, as if they just grew out of the ground vertically. Graham Brown, a former curator of insects at the Northern Territory Museum, thinks these look like enormous tombstones. These mounds are built like a compass needle, and it has long been a mystery why this particular species of termites aligns their homes with the poles of the Earth. But there are some theories about this. Despite the misleading name, the termites aren't actually magnetic, but there is some evidence proving that these can be influenced by magnetic fields. In one experiment, scientists had buried magnets in the ground where these termites were beginning to build new mounds, but when they returned years later, the termites had abandoned these mounds. Maybe these termites could sense the Earth's magnetic field, and the magnets threw off their sense of direction. Brown explains that these mounds are like apartment buildings for termites. A single nest might be home to tens of thousands of these insects. There are little rooms and galleries with just the right amount of moisture and a favorable internal temperature. The structure is quite strategic, with only the edge of the tall and skinny mound facing the sun during the hottest hours of the day. This keeps the termites from getting overheated. Even during summer floods, the termites remain safe inside these unique homes, feeding on the stored food. Now, what confuses the biologists is the fact that only this species builds north-south pointed mounds. If this method of building has more advantages, why don't all termite species do it? Number 5. Gympie tree. This seemingly harmless bush is a member of the nettle family called Urticaceae and is named after the Australian town of Gympie. The name originates from the indigenous language of the Gubbi people. It is native to the rainforest areas of northeastern Australia. It is mostly found in the clearings in the rainforest and along creek lanes and tracks. This poisonous plant has leaves causing one of the most painful stings in the entire world, and there is no antidote for this. Its sting is so painful and long-lasting at times that people may suffer from it for years and even commit suicide just to get rid of the pain. From afar, it looks inconspicuous and even harmless and inviting plant with soft and fuzzy features, but a slight brush with its leaves and you will end up in unimaginable pain. The pain has been described as like being burnt with hot acid and electrocuted at the same time. Also, there's no definitive period for the pain to go away. It can take months and even years to fade away. These shrubs usually grow up to 3 meters in height, and their leaves are heart-shaped with serrated edges. The tiny hair filaments on the stems and leaves of the plant are what deliver the painful toxin to your body. The tip of each filament has a tiny bulb containing the neurotoxin. This bulb can easily break off and get lodged into human skin. To say that the pain caused by Gympie is legendary would be an understatement. A.C. Macmillan, a road surveyor from North Queensland, reported in 1866 that in an encounter with this plant, his pack horse got stung. The poor creature got mad and died within 2 hours from the pain. Ernie Ryder, an unfortunate man who ended up getting slapped in the face, arms, and chest by this menacing plant, in 1963 recalled that it felt like giant hands were trying to squash his chest. The pain was unbearable for the first few days, during which he couldn't perform basic tasks. According to Ernie, the sting persisted for 2 whole years and recurred every time he took a cold shower. In severe cases, the lymph nodes under your arms can also swell up and throb painfully. This can last 1 to 4 hours. Researchers have found out that the toxin of Gympie is incredibly heat-resistant and chemically stable. This means even the dried-out botanical samples of this plant gathering dust in a museum for a century are still dangerous and can sting you. And even today, there's no antidote or successful medication to treat the pain caused by this horrifying plant. Horizontal falls. These falls are also called Garangadim by the local indigenous people, often referred to as horis. Also, are an unusual natural phenomenon located near the coast of the Kimberley region in Australia. Sir David Attenborough has called it the most unusual natural wonder of Australia. He noted that just very few people in the world had seen this natural wonder around 15 years ago. This ocean phenomenon is the result of incredibly high tidal shifts that compress the 2 narrow breaks in the Kimberley coastline. It looks as if someone has pulled the plug on the ocean. This waterfall forms when the seawater rushes through 2 short and extremely narrow gorges only 300 meters apart from each other. Changing tide levels of up to 10 meters in height cause water buildup on one or the other side of this gap. This creates a waterfall of up to 13 feet. Boats can easily travel through this gap, and adventure enthusiasts can enjoy this unbelievable phenomenon up close. Millions of gallons of ocean water get sucked through a narrow gorge. According to researchers, during high tides, around 1 million gallons of water pours through the gap every second. These horizontal falls are also reversible. When the tide turns, the fall flows in the opposite direction. This is why it is considered one of the most dangerous currents in Australia. The seaward gap is only 70 feet in width. This waterfall is unlike any other found in the world, and therefore has attracted the attention of naturalists who can't help but be amazed by this unique waterfall. Glowworm Tunnel. In the early 1900s, a standard gauge railway into the Wolgan Valley was constructed in order to connect the Newnes oil shale industrial development to Sydney. This railway connected with the Western Main Line at Newnes Junction, about 50 kilometers south of Newnes. The line opened in 1906 and was dismantled in the 1940s. The Glowworm Tunnel is one of the 2 abandoned tunnels on this railway. It curves almost 180 degrees and is pretty dark and eerie. In normal weather conditions, a small creek flows through this tunnel. This is an ideal habitat with just the right conditions for certain glowworms that live in the walls and roof of this tunnel. They are extremely sensitive to habitat disturbance, especially noise, light, touching, and smoke. This tunnel is around 400 meters long. You can take a mesmerizing, family-friendly stroll through this tunnel covered in glistening glowworms. Fireflies tend to light up this dark and humid old track. Explorers have to traverse a slightly bumpy path by car and walk down the abandoned railway tracks surrounded by lush forests, narrow gorges, and strange rock formations in order to reach this tunnel illuminated by glowing bluish-green light specks. Fireflies are soft-bodied insects, also called glowworms or lightning bugs. They use bioluminescence during twilight to attract mates and prey. They produce cold lights with no infrared or ultraviolet frequencies that may be yellow, green, or pale red in color. The people visiting this tunnel have to turn off their torches, put their phones on silent, and stop chatting before the stunning bright twinkling lights appear. Cone snails. Around 133 species of the venomous cone snail are found in the waters of the Great Barrier Reef located in Queensland. They've been called the underwater tank by National Geographic. They prey on fish, mollusks, and worms. The most poisonous species of these cones are responsible for inflicting serious injuries to humans. The geography cone, or Conus geographicus, is a large cone snail species that grows around 120 millimeters in length. These are lethal but not particularly aggressive towards humans. The cone snails are entirely marine creatures and are often found lying under stones, rubble, sand, and even tangled among weeds along the coastline from Western Australia to southern Queensland. These snails use their proboscis, a long mobile appendage having a lethal harpoon loaded with around 100 different neurotoxins. They hunt at night and paralyze their victims by stabbing them with the proboscis. Their sting initially feels like a bee sting, but soon after, things get worse. Severe pain, tingling, and numbness are felt in the stung area. In extreme cases, the person might have difficulty speaking, suffer from double vision, and can even develop respiratory paralysis. A cone snail sting requires immediate medical attention. So far, there's no antivenom available for cone snail poison, so divers and explorers should be cautious when dealing with these menacing creatures. Pterosaur. Recently, 2 new fossils of ancient flying reptiles were unearthed by scientists. These dinosaur remains were excavated from the baked red clay of outback Queensland. According to initial reports, these bones belonged to pterosaurs. The bone scarring found on the skeletons indicated that one of the pterosaurs could have been attacked by a crocodile. Pterosaurs are considered among the earliest vertebrates that evolved powered flight. The Australian Age of Dinosaurs Museum announced the discovery to the public. According to reports, these fossilized bones were found at cattle stations in Boulia and Winton. The 2 pterosaurs were found buried almost 355 kilometers apart. Experts are speculating that these dinosaurs date back to the mid-Cretaceous period, around 145 million years ago. The first partial femurs were found in 1991 during a field expedition, while the second partial femurs were discovered more than a decade later in Winton. Finding the remains of these ancient flying reptiles in the Australian continent is a rare occurrence. So far, only 4 pterosaur species have been identified in Australia. One of these, called the Thapangunka shawi, is considered the largest known reptile to have flown in the Australian skies. The wingspan of Thapangunka shawi was around 7 meters. Researchers are elated by the discovery of these new pterosaur remains. These fossils tell us a lot about how reptiles interacted millions of years ago. Adele Pentland, a Swinburne University PhD student, has stated that the presence of 2 circular depressions on one of the pterosaur femur suggests that it was bitten by a crocodile. The 2 remains are quite similar, and they also closely resemble the fossils excavated in Brazil. This has led the scientists to assume that during that time, these pterosaurs were spread on every continent. Wurdi Youang. Australia's very own version of Stonehenge, the Wurdi Youang is an Aboriginal stone arrangement. It is located off the Little River Ripley Road at Mount Rothwell in Victoria. The stone arrangement takes the form of an irregular egg shape or ovoid. It is around 50 meters in diameter with a major axis aligning east-west. The arrangement is composed of around 100 basalt stones of varying diameter. There are, however, 3 very prominent waist-high stones at the western end. These form the highest part of the ring. So far, we know very little about why this was built or who built it. Experts believe it may be a ceremonial site, just like many other ancient stone arrangements found in Australia. Wurdi Youang is on the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Register, the Victorian Heritage Register, and the City of Greater Geelong Planning Scheme Heritage Overlay. The name Wurdi Youang is a Wadawurrung name. It means big hill. A series of stones found west of the arrangement's western apex apparently mark positions of the setting sun at the equinoxes and solstices. A survey study revealed that these alignments are almost accurate. It has been suggested by scientists that it could be around 11,000 years old, making it the oldest astronomical observatory in the world. The site is registered in Victoria's Mount Rothwell stone arrangement and was transferred to the Wathaurong Aboriginal Cooperative in August 2006. Number 8. A prison tree. Located in Derby, the Boab prison tree is a 1,500 years old, massive and hollow Adansonia gregory tree. The tree is situated about 6 kilometers south of Derby, Western Australia, and has a girth of 14.7 meters. The tree was reportedly used as a lockup for the Indigenous prisoners in the 1890s. These prisoners were usually on their way to Derby for sentencing. In the native languages of the Western Kimberley region, Boab trees are called Larigadae, and they bear serious mythological significance. These old trees are often treated like cherished individuals of the society with unique personalities. The Derby Boab tree was first documented by anthropologist Herbert Bastow. In his 1916 expedition, he photographed the tree and captioned the images as the hollow trunk of a live Boab used by the Aborigines as hut and burial place, Mayhaw's Well King Sound. He also wrote that the natives have long been using this lusus naturae or nature's freak as a place to live. It does look dry and comfortable. He also found bleached human bones, suggesting that the Aborigines may have used it as an ossuary for the dead. The myth of this tree being used as a prison dates back to 1948. This was when Vlas Sanalis, an Australian artist, described one of his artwork titled The Boab Tree as a tree that was used as a temporary prison in its early days. It is now a popular tourist attraction and is protected under the Aboriginal Heritage Act 1972. In recent years, authorities built a fence around the tree to protect it from too much human. Number 10. Big Brother. In 2014, a man named William Bates stumbled upon a skeleton on the bank of a river. Bates was an elder of the Bartcankchi people of New South Wales. Using his extensive knowledge and wisdom, Bates was able to identify that the skeleton belonged to an Aboriginal male. The first thing law enforcement does when human remains are discovered is to establish the date and time of death. After initial investigations, experts postulated that the man was probably killed during one of the battles between Indigenous people and the British militia in the 18th and 19th centuries. They assumed this from the signs of violence found on the bones. A paleoanthropologist named Dr. Michael Westaway from Griffith University, Queensland, examined the skeleton later on and realized these remains were much older. Westaway concluded that the man was deeply cared for. The head of the body was tenderly placed on a cushion of sand in the burial. There was a long wound on the skull too that seemed to have been caused by a cutlass blade that was used by British soldiers at the time. The lab analysis further revealed that the Aboriginal man was actually murdered in the 13th century, long before the British even arrived in Australia and introduced metal objects. So what actually killed the ancient yet important man? One theory proposes that the fatal injury was a result of an attack from a weapon called Lil, a kind of sharpened club. The man has been named Karkucha, which means big brother. Westaway, however, thinks that Karkucha was killed by an ancient iconic boomerang, a long, sharp-edged weapon. If Westaway's theory is in fact correct, it proves that ancient Australia was plagued with intertribal conflict. A series of rock paintings found next to where Karkucha's body was recovered also provides more evidence solidifying this theory. These paintings depict two tribes in different colors. They can be seen holding shields, boomerangs, and clubs. Scientists now know for sure that Karkucha's demise was caused by a fatal blow on the head at least 800 years ago. Number 11. Dingo Fence. The dingo fence, or dog fence, is considered the longest fence in the world. It is a pest exclusion fence that was built in the 1880s. In Australia, pest exclusion fences were quite frequently built to protect the croplands and smaller plots from the marsupial predators. The rabbit populations skyrocketed across southern Australia in the 1860s and 1870s, and these animals became a huge problem for the local farmers. The dingo population was also growing rapidly, and it was becoming difficult to keep them out. That's when the locals decided to build a dingo-proof barrier. Government funds were employed in heightening and expanding the fence. The dingo fence was supposed to keep the dogs out of the fertile southeastern part of the continent. The animals had been exterminated in large numbers from this land in the past, but people could not afford another attack by them. The fence kept the sheep flocks of southern Queensland safe from the dingo attacks. The fence is one of the longest man-made structures in the world. It stretches almost 5,614 kilometers from Jimbo on the Darling Downs near Dalby through thousands of kilometers of arid land. The fence terminates west of the Eyre Peninsula on the cliffs of the Nullarbor Plain near Nundroo. The idea of a dingo barrier fence didn't get much attention before 1948, as it would require resources for maintenance and repair. The fence has been quite successful in keeping the dingoes at bay, but a few are still found in various parts of the southern states. The fence was announced as one of the Q150 icons of Queensland in 2009. It was, after all, an innovative project that greatly reduced the loss of sheep and other cattle to predators. However, the exclusion of dingoes from the region has led to the increase in pasture competition from the rabbits, kangaroos, and emus, and a steady number of sheep are still lost to these feral dogs annually. The 2,500-kilometre part of the fence located in Queensland has been termed the Great Barrier Fence or the Wild Dog Barrier Fence 11. The Department of Agriculture and Fisheries maintains and administers this fence. Their staff patrols a 300-kilometre section of the fence every week.